Kenyan government considers free healthcare for all its citizens. Ways one can fit physical fitness into a busy schedule. Kenya approaches the highly charged 2022 elections.
Sita vote kwa sababu the system is crooked. Watu wote wenye saizi wako kwa serikali bado ndio wanataka bado tuwapatie kura na wametufail wote wakiwa support.
Banks to consider lending loans to individuals who do not have a steady source of income yet. Hello there, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us for the evening news update today. My name is Gloria Mwangi. While bringing the current pandemic into an end will require investments in vaccine and vaccination programs, countries must also build resilience in investing in preparedness and ensure that all its citizens acquire affordable health services. Dylan Gitau reports.
It'll be some time before we know the real impact of COVID-19, the extent of the damage done and whether it gave rise to the new corrupt activities. However, it is already clear that a strong coordinated approach to anti-corruption is needed at the global level to help ensure that emergency economic rescue and stimulus packages reach intended beneficiaries in a transparent, inclusive and effective manner.
Health system it's not good in Kenya. Why? Because of how it is being managed. It is not managed well. Yeah.
And now our correspondent David Muli joins us live. What can you say about that?
Patients, especially from public hospitals, have often complained about the poor services rendered to them, poor facilities. They felt like the money that they've had to pay for the services offered, especially for the facilities in terms of lab testing, scanning, and they don't feel like their money is matching up to the quality that is being offered by these institutions. Yeah.
Kuna ziko sawa, lakini hospitali zingine services zao naziweka bei kali kushinda wengine. Sasa huwa vitu zinanifaa kushinda hospitali hizo ndogo. Sasa unaona kazi kubwa zingine services zao zinakuwa expensive sana.
For sure, the government should really be put to blame for that. Government should ensure that their facilities are up to par and that they offer good quality services. They should ensure at least the patients are treated with the right attention. So that at least our health systems can improve in general.
Do you think it will be a good idea if the government considered free healthcare for all its citizens in Kenya?
Health inequalities in Africa, in Kenya, in the rest of Africa exists between the rich and the poor. And it's very evident with some of the situations we see here, where we have public hospitals and we have private hospitals that arguably are providing better healthcare services. And when you have someone who is not able to access these services because they are not affordable, and the wealthy are able to access these services because they have the ability to. So you will find consequences apply. You have poor people who are going through challenges they shouldn't be, especially when the services are there, but they are not they're not accessible to them because, well, they're not affordable. So yes, healthcare inequalities exist. Unfortunately, the gap is very big also. The inequality is very big because we have so many people who are poor in Africa, and compared to those who are wealthy, and the standard of living also is very unequal between the wealthy and the poor. So you have living expenses are going up, healthcare expenses is also going up, and that contributes to accessibility. So in terms of accessibility, it exists. Private hospitals, many people don't even dare think of taking their loved ones or themselves to private hospitals because affordability matters. The other thing is on the ability to access, it's still on accessibility really, inequality in terms of ability to access healthcare services outside the country. So you will find poor people will struggle. There are certain services that are not in the country. So many people will go to India, to the US, to Israel, to other places, and it's very easy for those who are wealthy. But for those who are not wealthy, some of them this is a dream, really. They will try to raise funds here and there, and some of them really won't make it. So that's a big issue. It's an inequality issue in the healthcare in Africa, and it's something that I hope people will work on. We see this inequality also with insurance coverage, where there are different insurance packages targeting different people or populations, and those who have money or those who are wealthy are able to get better insurance policies, better coverage, life insurance, healthcare insurance policies that cover so much that other people are not in a position to access. So many poor people, most of them are also very young, are not able to get insurance coverage, and it's a big issue. Yeah, so you will find that in insurance, for the people who are poor, they will see it as an non-essential, really. They're looking for food, they're looking for shelter, they're looking for rent. So when you talk about insurance and insurance coverage and how expensive it is, they will consider putting food on the table first. And that really works in building the inequality that is there. When it comes to improving healthcare in developing countries, one way is public-private partnerships, where the government will call out to entrepreneurs and investors to target low-income populations, and such targeting and investments targeting low-income populations becomes paramount in terms of improving healthcare in the slums, improving healthcare in the rural areas where it's not accessible, and even with the street children and street, the homeless. So they need to be targeted in terms of investments, and that will go a long way in improving healthcare. In developing countries, we have government-backed insurance coverage. Like in Kenya, we have what we call NHIF. I believe it stands for National Health Insurance Cover. And it's important for the government to align policies of government-backed insurance coverage to target low income and enable them to be affordable and accessible, put in place enough measures, as well as universal coverage. That's another angle when it comes to improving quality healthcare. Universal coverage becomes very important. When there is universal coverage and investment towards universal coverage, certain services should be free. Certain services should be easy to access. And we also need to do it to put investment in the facilities that are there. So not just offer universal coverage, but there are no facilities backing them. It's important to have facilities backing them. And when we talk about support for insurance coverage that is government backed, we need those who are wealthy to pay more. And when they are able to pay a little bit more than those who are poor, then that goes a long way. They can't all be paying similar amounts because we need the money. Things that don't just happen for free. We need the money, and that money should be channeled to universal coverage. That money should be channeled to getting the facilities that are required. And when such happens, then we are talking about improving quality of healthcare in the country, in developing countries. So I think government is at the center of it all, and we hope that we have people, leaders who will come to appreciate this and look at it that way, as well as pull in the private sector and cause change.
Increased levels of physical inactivity have negative impacts on health systems, the environment, the economic development, the quality of life. Globally, 28% of adults aged 18 years and above are not active enough. Jan2022 reports. In 2018, the World Health Organization launched a new Action Global Plan on physical activity, which outlines 4 policy actions and 20 specific policy recommendations.
In high-income countries, 26% of men and 35% of women were insufficiently physically active, as compared to 12% of men and 24% of women in low-income countries. Low or decreasing physical activity levels often correspond with a high or rising gross national product. The drop in physical activity is partially due in action during leisure time and sedentary behavior on the job and at home. Likewise, an increase in the use of passive modes of transportation also contributes to insufficient physical activity.
Unaendanga gym?
Hapana, sinangi gym.
Mbona?
Mwili yangu ni ya rumba, ukiangalia hii ni ya rumba hii. Na pia masaa. Yes.
Unaendanga gym?
Kwa gym hapana.
Mbona uendangi gym?
Nyama kuenda kuinua chuma hakuna.
Una kipingi fit?
Yes, I do.
Why do you keep fit?
Because healthy, alafu inanisaidia yani mentally na physically pia. And vizuri kuwa fitness therapist. Healthy and mentally, yeah.
What are some of the ways one can fit physical activity into a busy schedule?
Okay, so basically you think of training as a way of life, not as a punishment. Just the same way you can go for shopping, take training as something that you love doing it. The way you enjoy going to shopping, the way you enjoy maybe to chill out with your friends, try and fix training in your schedule. For example, start by slowly, start by day 1, you work out for like 20 minutes. Day 2, increase your amount of working out for like 30 minutes one more time. Then put a schedule of like 3 days a week. With time, you start building up, it becomes a habit. Yeah.
and it becomes part of you, just a lifestyle. Yeah, that's what I can say. Thank you.
Doc, sikuchapia story.
Wase, jana nilikuwa napiga ndirao mtaani. Nilikuwa na 20 bob kwa tenje. Nikauliza, tashindaje vimeja na 20 bob kwa tenje? Kiasi. Huyu meka kapopa kutoka chini ya ndai akadai, si bet na betika ni grand jackpot. Na 20 bob unaweza shinda hadi 50 mili. Nikamshow. Lakini pia sina bundles. Alafu madhawa maya nitokea tu akidai, lakini na betika unaweza bet bila bundles.
Tulia. So unaweza betika na mbao ushinde 50 mili bila bundles.
Kabisa. Ukibetika unapata more. Pata more na betika.
Hii story imeletwa kwako na Betika, the official sponsors of happiness. Gambling can be addictive. Play responsibly. Not for persons under 18 years of age. This advert is authorized and regulated by the Betting Control and Licensing Board. License number BK281. Betika, jukwaa la mabingwa.
As Kenya prepares for the 2022 general elections, there are some signs that the ethnicized political discourse and its underlying drivers are changing. As in so many countries around the world, this has been driven in part with the experience of COVID-19 and the restrictions on people's lives that have come with the pandemic, which have brought about and highlighted inequalities among Kenyan citizens. It may be that the new political dynamics will prove just as divisive and disruptive as what came before.
Indeed, there are growing fears that unless the current political discourse is toned down and the nature of the electoral process reimagined, Kenya will once again descend into violence in the run-up to next year's elections. Taken together, this political dynamics and conflicts trend highlights that Kenya once again faces the prospect of violence in the run-up to, during or after the 2022 elections. 12 months out from the elections, there is still time to take measures to mitigate the risk of violence. Arguably, the single biggest conflict driver in Kenya is socio-economic inequality, which has historically been mobilized along ethnic lines, but is increasingly being represented as an issue of interclass conflict, powerfully evoked by the hustler versus dynasty narrative.
Unafuatanga politics? Mbona?
Si nafuatanga ndio at least warudishe economy chini.
Unafuatanga politics?
Yeah, sometimes.
Mbona?
Napenda kufuata politics at least nijue my leaders. Nijue my leaders when I elect. Ndio at least wakifanya mambo yao najua yenyewe ni mtu nilielect amefanya mambo yake.
How can we make elections safe in Kenya?
Safe elections. Sometimes in this space people do tend to ask, do Kenyans even want safe elections in the first place? Given the quality of people that we've been electing to parliament for the last decades, do we actually want safe elections? But the straightforward answer to that is that you can't have safe elections if you're not building institutional systems that actually A, level the playing field for everybody, but also B, that work for everyone, regardless of their party affiliation across the board. So whether you're from UDA, from ODM, from Wiper, from the Azimio coalition, from whatever the party, ideally you need to know that you're going to be treated the exact same way. But to get to that point, you have to put in the hard work of building institutions that work, building institutions that treat people essentially the same way. And even within parties, within coalitions, you also have to be willing to put in the hard work of essentially ensuring that people can actually get a fair shot at getting specific posts. So you actually have open, clear, fair nomination processes instead of just handing people direct tickets, for example. And ultimately, those are some of the basics that have to be done to ensure that you have a safe election.
Access to credit cards has eased in Kenya after the government recommended new reforms to help ease doing business last year. According to a review In the reforms, the government recommended sharing of credit information from utility and retail companies to credit reference bureaus. This is basically for credit scoring purposes. Dennis Mungai reports.
The credit scoring allows lenders to rate all their borrowers before advancing any loans. The report also cites the enactment of legislation allowing the sharing of positive and negative credit information.
Kona credit card.
Hapana, bado. Mbona hujachukua? Ni ile process ndo mingi kuchukua.
So unaweza taka process ikwe kiasi.
Inge minimiziwa tu mambo ya kuzunguka ishe. Uchukue kani kama tenje.
Kuna credit card?
Mimi sina.
Mbona huna?
Mimi kusema ukweli usikii mwaka ndo naingia 18. Miaka yangu bado haijakubali.
Unaweza taka government iweke reduce age limit ya kuchukua credit card?
Hapana, isi reduce. Wangoje tu niingie 18. Ni mwaka.
Huwezi taka kusave pesa?
Nda save juu nikifika.
Could you briefly explain to us some of the advantages and disadvantages of having credit cards?
Okay, so before we talk about the advantages and the disadvantages of credit cards, first we must figure out what credit cards are. So, credit cards are a line of credit given by the bank to its clientele that allows the clientele to borrow money so that they can make purchases and actually conduct transactions without actually having cash in their accounts. This credit, this money borrowed, is agreed to be paid back at a later date with interest, of course. So, in terms of advantages, the main advantage of a credit card is it allows you to conduct business, to make transactions when you do not have actual cash on hand. Sometimes you just don't have money in your account and you need to actually make business transactions. Credit cards allow you there's the flexibility of being able to conduct business and, conduct transactions even without having cash in your account. This is the advantage of flexibility in terms of you can do business anytime, anywhere. Moving on to the disadvantages of credit cards. If a client leans so much on using their credit card, it becomes sort of like a clutch. You might find that they tend to spend more than they are allowed to borrow. And then if they become dependent on this credit card, they become unable to actually pay back. Because if you have a line of credit through which you can borrow money, of course there are usually certain limitations, but if you have a certain amount of money that the bank allows you to borrow to create transactions, you might tend to lean towards using the credit cards, and that might affect how you manage your money, and it might become a bit tricky, especially in paying back, considering that when you pay back the credit card, according to the terms and conditions, you might have to pay back with a certain interest, and if you are unable, of course there are penalties. So I think the main disadvantage that comes with credit cards is that they give the client so much freedom, so much independence. They can use that money however they want, and because, to be honest, the bank doesn't really care. It doesn't really care how you use that money. They just care about how you will pay back. And if you are unable to do so, then there will be penalties.
Also, in your view, would it be a good thing for the government to consider lending loans to the individuals who do not have a steady source of income yet?
Now, as for whether it would be a good thing for banks to consider lending loans to people without a source of income, I guess it depends on from which angle you're looking at it from. Well, from the customer's perspective, it would be amazing, heaven on earth, if you actually just needed money and you can go to a bank and request for a loan, even without a source of income, and be guaranteed you will get it. I mean, who wouldn't want that? But more importantly, looking at it from the bank's perspective, that would be a very horrid decision, because it's not business. The whole point of lending out loan is so that they can be paid back with interest. Now, if you're considering lending money to people who do not have a source of income, thus cannot guarantee that they will be able to pay back the money, then clearly a business acumen is in the negatives, because there's no guarantee and nobody likes paying loans. Even currently in the world, even with people with sources of income, you find that there are people who abscond on paying their loans, even with sources of income. So you can imagine what would happen if you're giving out money to people who cannot guarantee that they will pay it back. So from the bank's perspective, I just think it would be a horrible decision.